everyone. Welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Diane Macedo.
And I'm Terry Moran. The Justice Department is launching an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department in the wake of Derek Chauvin's conviction for the murder of George Floyd. The Attorney General says the probe will determine whether the department has a pattern of using excessive force or discriminatory conduct.
I strongly believe that good officers do not want to work in systems that allow bad practices. Good officers welcome accountability because accountability is an essential part of building trust with the community, and public safety requires public trust.
And we'll have more on that new federal investigation, what it means for Minneapolis's police department and departments around the country.
Meanwhile, there are new calls for justice after another police-related death in Ohio. Protesters gathered after an officer shot and killed 16-year-old Micaiah Bryant. Police say she was attempting to stab someone when the officer fired. Our team is on the ground in Columbus with the body cam video.
And President Biden is calling on Congress to pass a police reform bill named for George Floyd.
This can be a giant step forward in the march toward justice in America.
President Biden called George Floyd's family after the verdict, telling them nothing is going to make it all better, but at least now there is some justice. Well, for the latest on the Derek Chauvin verdict, we're joined once again by Kenneth Moten in Minneapolis, who's been on this trial for the whole time. Kenneth, good to see you. Thanks for being with us again, of course. So we mentioned this Justice Department investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, a pattern and practice investigation, it's called, following Derek Chauvin's conviction. And now we're hearing from George Floyd's family. How are they reacting to the Attorney General's announcement?
Well, Terry, Terrence Floyd, George Floyd's brother, he simply said, I'm for it. He said he was unaware of the issues, the problems inside the Minneapolis Police Department until his brother was murdered by Derek Chauvin. Family attorney Ben Crump tells us that this is a step in the right direction because, as he said in a quote, as the family focuses on the next chapter, they want to deal with implicit bias in policing. Diane and Terry.
So, Kenneth, Derek Chauvin now a convicted murderer and not a free man anymore. Of course, bail revoked after that conviction, even pending appeal. What is his life like now, his first day of many, many more to come behind bars?
We got word that Derek Chauvin is being held in one of the most secure units of the state's only maximum security prison. We actually have new images just in of that facility. It's called Oak Park Heights. It's about 25 miles from downtown Minneapolis, where I'm standing right now. He was transferred there last night, and it's understandable, Terry, why he would be separated from other inmates. There are only a few in that very secure unit. He is under 24-hour surveillance. There are cameras in that single cell. No contact with any other inmates again. Also, corrections officers making rounds every 30 minutes. His meals are brought to his cell. And again, as they watch him, they will allow him to step outside of that cell for about 30 minutes every single day, or about an hour for his daily exercise. And so Derek Chauvin, the man who, a veteran police officer who spent decades as a police officer putting people in jail, is now in prison.
And the judicial process, the case itself, that's not over yet. Derek Chauvin is set to be sentenced in a couple of months, and of course he has the right to appeal his conviction. So what are these next steps looking like?
This is far from over. Sentencing happens in 8 weeks, but Derek Chauvin and his defense team, they have already signaled that there will likely be an appeal, and we understand that process will take up to a year or so. And under state law, we understand he has 90 days to appeal. And for that sentencing that we were just talking about there, it appears that per state law that he will only be sentenced under that most serious charge of second-degree murder, second-degree unintentional murder there. And we know that the maximum sentence is 40 years, but sentencing guidelines suggest that he's more likely to receive up to 15 years because he had no prior criminal record. But the state attorney general, Keith Ellison, has already indicated that the prosecution, the state here, will ask for a lot more here. They believe that there were aggravating circumstances here, from the children who were there, those bystanders, to the aggravated nature and the felony there that was also, and the other charges as well. So they'll be asking for a lot more when it comes to how much time Derek Chauvin serves in jail.
And ultimately, the decision with Judge Cahill. Kenneth Moten in Minneapolis, as you have been throughout this trial. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kenneth. And meanwhile, as we mentioned, the Justice Department is now investigating the Minneapolis Police Department for unconstitutional or unlawful policing. They'll be looking into systemic issues and whether the department has a pattern of discriminatory conduct, excessive force, including at protests, and whether its treatment of people with behavioral disabilities violates the law. ABC News Deputy Political Director Avery Harper joins us now for more on this. Hi, Avery. What does this investigation tell you about how this administration and this Justice Department plan to respond to issues on race and policing?
Well, the Biden administration and the DOJ have always been serious and always said that they've been serious about addressing issues of police violence, of institutional racism. But at the end of the day, there are about 18,000 law enforcement agencies that are within the United States. And so while many would argue that it's great that the DOJ is looking into the Minneapolis Police Department, there are so many other agencies who've had similar issues.
And Vice President Kamala Harris joined the president yesterday to call on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which she introduced as a senator. It's already passed in the House. So what do you think the chances are that this bill gets past the Senate?
Right. It passed in the House last month. It is in the Senate. But the chances are pretty slim of it passing in its current form because Democrats have to get Republicans on board. We do know that Senator Tim Scott, a Republican, has been meeting with Senator Cory Booker behind the scenes to maybe push something forward on this. And Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, wants to bring this up for a vote at some point this year. But it's unclear if it has the votes in order to pass.
All right. Avery Harper in Washington for us. Thanks, Avery. And earlier today, I spoke with former NYPD Chief of Detectives and ABC News contributor Robert Boyce about the Chauvin verdict, that Department of Justice investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, and the impact it could all have on the future of policing. The Attorney General, he just said he's launching this investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, and they're looking for any unlawful or unconstitutional policing practices. How significant is this probe?
It's going to be a pretty in-depth probe, and they're going to find some things because I looked to the Ferguson Police Department, and they found a discriminatory practice of deployment into minority neighborhoods that other neighborhoods weren't seeing. So you can see policy review, patterns, practices, procedures, all these things. The patterns, are they discriminatory when they look at things, when they look at arrests, disciplinary procedures? It's a really in-depth investigation, and it's tough for any department to withstand it. Now, if they don't make changes, and I believe they will, the civil penalties will be overwrought, and you have to. So I see big changes coming. I think the Floyd family can expect that. And the Minneapolis Police Department, they had two really horrible shootings that I can think of off the top of my head. But Floyd and the other fellow who's doing time in jail. So it's really bad there. I see it changes. I really like Chief Arendando. He has made changes. However, this is going to take other steps as well. No more neck restraints. That I see coming down the line as well in any place across the country. If any chief out there is still supporting those, he or she needs to be replaced immediately.
How do you think law enforcement officers and other members of the law enforcement community will react to the news of this probe?
Well, I think if you didn't expect this coming, this is the other shoe falling, if you will. After the criminal trial, you're going to see this. What happened there? What went wrong? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a good practice to get better, because we're always looking to get better and make changes in our department. So you'll see this. We had this in the NYPD. We have oversight here, looking at our practices and our procedures. There's nothing wrong with it, and we'll take the outside information and make changes as well. It's an ever-evolving world. So I think most clear-thinking police executives will embrace it.
And it seems like there are two goals with an investigation like this. One is to uncover any wrongdoing and obviously fix it, but also to instill more trust in the public, for the public to know that their police departments are doing the right thing, and if they won't, they'll be held accountable. So on that note, I want to take a look with you at the initial report that the Minneapolis Police Department issued right after George Floyd's death. And it says man dies after medical incident during police interaction. Now, among other issues, it makes no mention of Chauvin restraining Floyd. It only says officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs, and it noted that he appeared to be suffering from medical distress. Now, knowing what we know now, how significant are some of the omissions in this police report, and how do you fix that in order to instill more trust when the public reads these kinds of reports and there is no video to show us what happened?
So at that juncture, they should have had a death in custody investigation launched immediately. Can't say that it doesn't sound like they did. They just encapsulated it properly, somewhat incorrectly. So once you have a death in custody, you have investigative units to respond. We changed our policy in New York City as well. We've created the Force Division. So the Force unit would come and do an immediate investigation to see what actually happened there by going into body-worn cameras, fixed cameras around in and around the area that was, going and doing canvasses, all sorts of things, looking at the officers if they had any prior incidents where they had or any monitoring lists. So this is what should have happened. You should, a death in custody is treated quite seriously, and it's not something you can just put on a few lines. I don't know if they did that. They should do that, and they will do that going forward, having an immediate response to investigate these incidents of a death in custody.
And in terms of being able to trust what we read in a police report, how important is it for the public to know that, and how important is it to hold the people responsible accountable if a police report doesn't match up with the events that actually happened?
So I think it's important to get the information out so you don't have misinformation going out there. So each police commander in that city should have a Twitter account to put information out, to get in touch with those who are investigating and come together with a group to put information out so you don't have misinformation, which we've seen throughout time. Rumors go around and it gets bad and people react to those rumors. And it's more often than that, it's not factual. So I think putting out there, getting Twitter accounts, using social media, get information out there, let them know what happened, let them know you took immediate action insofar as the officer's standing, if he's a modified or if he stayed on there or not, she stayed on there. You have to get that out immediately to be transparent and get the word out that you see it, you acknowledge it, and you're moving forward on it.
So, Robert, in this case, were it not for that bystander video shot by a 17-year-old, do you think that we'd be talking about George Floyd's case today?
I don't know. I don't know if he would have been. Let's put it this way, Diane. I don't think he might not have been convicted without that bystander video. That's today's world. We see it all the time. The handheld phone camera has changed policing. No one does suppression policing anymore. If you do, it's just going to get worse and worse. Investigative policing is the way to go. Precision policing, where you identify certain criminals that are causing the main drivers of crime, and then pursue them. Not this blanket type of policing we call suppression policing. So we've seen changes, and a lot has to do with the camera. I salute it, and I have no problem at all that young girl young woman, I should say, was very courageous in doing so. I think it changed the whole trajectory of the trial itself.
All right. Robert Boyce, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great insights. Thanks, Bob. Another deadly police shooting, this time involving a 16-year-old girl in Ohio, was unfolding at roughly the same time the Derek Chauvin verdict was being read out. When we come back, our team in Columbus joins us with the latest on this case and why authorities may have released body camera video of the incident so quickly. Welcome back. Yesterday afternoon, as the guilty verdict for former officer Derek Chauvin was announced, a black teenager was shot dead by police in Columbus, Ohio. Police say 16-year-old Micaiah Bryant was attempting to stab someone when the officer fired. Our Trevor Ault is joining us live now from Columbus, where the mayor and police officials just held a press conference. Good afternoon, Trevor. So what is the latest there in Columbus?
Well, Terry, the police department and the mayor just played some more extended body camera footage from this deadly incident that happened yesterday afternoon as that Derek Chauvin verdict was unfolding. And it gave us a much more clear picture of how that event actually happened. We cannot play it for you in its entirety because it's very graphic and we have to edit it so it's okay for broadcast. But I can tell you that we saw the officer who fired the shot, who's now named Officer Nicholas Reardon, arrived in a vehicle by himself and watched as Ma'Khia Bryant, in police words, attempted to stab those two people in front of him very quickly after he got outside of the vehicle to happen. And him opening fire was seconds after he got out of his vehicle. And after that, we saw as Ma'Khia Bryant fell down bleeding into that vehicle, some of the citizens surrounding that officer accosting him, asking him why he had opened fire, and he briefly defended himself to them, saying that she had gone at another woman with a knife. We also saw some of the body camera footage from two of the other officers who were responding, Terry, one of them applying immediate first aid along with Officer Reardon, who fired those shots. Another was then pulling aside some of the witnesses after those shots had been fired. Having said that, beyond those body camera footage, those clips that have been released fairly early on, and in fact, incredibly early on, police have not been able to provide a lot of answers. And that's because right now the Bureau of Criminal Investigations is handling this to decide whether or not this officer acted criminally, whether or not he was following police department protocol. But either way, I asked the mayor of Columbus, who has been calling for a lot of police reform, who has declared this a tragedy because a 16-year-old girl's life was taken. I asked him whether he would push for reform and changes to prevent something like this happening, regardless of whether or not the officer acted appropriately. And this is what he told me.
The fact that we had a 16-year-old girl armed and involved with physical violence with other folks in that community, that's something for us to look in the mirror and to say, what are we doing or not doing? How can we better serve young people who are facing one of the greatest spikes in violence in this city and in cities across America? What else can we be doing?
Now, the mayor continued to tout the need for transparency, and specifically with body cameras, which he says he is championed, and he's pushing for even more of them for the police department. He is continuing to stress that need for incidents like this to have that footage because, as we know, Terry, this shooting happening right as we received the verdict in the Derek Chauvin case, these police-involved shootings are a long way from uncommon in the United States of America, Terry.
That is for sure. And this officer says, and the body camera video, as far as we can see, it appears to show that he was trying to protect another person from being stabbed. So what does that condition mean for use of force there? And what are activists who want police reform saying about that element?
So according to Ohio law, according to police policy, when deadly force is present in a circumstance, whether it's someone trying to apply deadly force at a police officer or at another person, that officer has the right to deploy deadly force themselves. And there isn't a step-by-step process of maybe firing a taser first. It's as soon as deadly force is present, the officer is within their right to use deadly force themselves. And so there are a lot of people who are reacting to this video who are saying it appears this officer tragically had to use deadly force in order to save another person. Having said that, a lot of activists are using this as another rallying cry for why there needs to be further police reform, because they're saying in the George Floyd death, which we now know was a murder at the hands of Derek Chauvin, you even heard from the prosecution that they said this was one person committing an act of murder. A lot of activists are saying if in these circumstances, in that presence of a 16-year-old girl swinging a knife, an officer can shoot and kill her, then that could just be considered state-sanctioned murder. And they are saying that is another reason why we need to see police reform. We saw a lot of people who were out protesting in Columbus. It's possible we could see more protesting tonight. It is very clear that despite the release of these videos and the fact that they do provide a lot of transparency, it is not necessarily putting everyone at ease as to whether or not this shooting was necessary.
A tragic and difficult event. Trevor Ault in Columbus, Ohio, thanks for that report.
And we want to go to NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson for some reaction to both the Bryant case and the Chauvin verdict. Derek, thanks for being here. We heard police there say that Ma'Khia Bryant was about to stab another young woman when the officer opened fire. The mayor said the officer took action to protect another young girl in our community. So what's your reaction to the use of force in this case?
Well, we have a situation in Minnesota where a police officer claimed to be reaching for a taser and pulled the gun. And now we have a situation in Ohio where a taser should have been used and yet a gun was used. We have to create a new standard of trust and safety when it comes to law enforcement. And that can only happen if we have a federal policy floor that will give all of us a sense of security that when officers have been called out to these incidents, they have the proper training, they understand how to de-escalate, and the proper weapons are used that's consistent with the threat or apparent threat that's there. Now, until the investigation is completed and other footage come out, we really don't know what happened. But unfortunately, we are living in the reality where there's been far too much police violence against African Americans across the country.
Derek, if I can ask you to take a step back with the Chauvin verdict, what do you see changing, if anything? The NAACP, more than 100 years old, your predecessors leading that important American organization, Emmett Till, Rodney King, so many others having to fight for justice. Do you think that we've made progress as a nation, that we do make progress? Is that just a comforting tale we tell ourselves?
Well, we are, at an inflection point. Well, Rodney King situation demonstrated 30 years ago that the claims that were decades old by African Americans concerning law enforcement officers across the country creating harm, injury, and deaths were actually true. What we also witnessed last year with George Floyd, that it was much more egregious than anyone suspected. Now we have an opportunity in the Senate to pass legislation to allow for a different level of transparency, protection, and to establish trust in our law enforcement agencies. I commend Chief of Police in Minneapolis who stood up and testified, breaking down that blue wall of silence. Now let's create a public policy frame that we can all be proud of.
And Derek, we also spoke with Rodney King's daughter earlier on our network, and I want to share with you some of her thoughts for George Floyd's daughter and how she compared the Chauvin verdict with what happened in her father's case.
No one could prepare her for what life is ahead, because who can imagine their self without their father, especially if she's like me, she's a daddy's girl, and I know she is. There's nothing a hug her mother couldn't do. No one could help you. We shouldn't even be going through this, period. No one should. But the fact that he was, he was sentenced, literally, he's guilty, that gives you hope. Like, okay, actually people are listening, they're paying attention, and of course the juror has a big part in this. It was minorities. It was a little bit of everybody on the juror section. Whereas in my dad's case, I don't think there was any Black people.
Now, to be clear, in the Rodney King case, one juror did later identify himself as mixed race, but that trial was moved from L.A. to a predominantly white suburb, and the jury was predominantly white. So, Derek, do you think having a diverse jury made a difference in the Chauvin trial?
I think what made the biggest difference is State Attorney General Keith Ellison taking over the case. As you can recall, the local DA wouldn't bring charges. And it wasn't until the state attorney general stepped in, put together a very strong team, and aggressively pursued the case. In fact, we all witnessed what took place. Our eyes did not deceive us, and it was multiple camera angles. And we had to go through all of what we've gone through just to get a conviction. That's not justice. A justice system should ensure that an officer's badge is not a shield for accountability, that there's the right type of accountability so no one is operating above the law, that there's a federal registry of police misconduct so a Derek Chauvin, had he been found innocent, could have gone to another jurisdiction and continued to serve as a police officer. In fact, under Minnesota law, he could have gone back to the Minneapolis Police Department, although he was fired because they have arbitration rules that will force officers, even if they are involved with misconduct, they won't lose their job. 50% of officers who've lost their jobs in Minneapolis because of misconduct, inclusive of falsifying documents, egregious actions, have gotten their jobs back through an arbitration clause and arbitrators who supersede the authority of the police chief and the mayor. That is not how we should position good cops to be able to provide protection and service when they have to work among bad apples like Derek Chauvin.
And we have seen bad cops like the one involved in the shooting of Tamir Rice who have been kicked out of some police forces, getting a job elsewhere. That National Registry might help get a hand on that. NAACP's
Absolutely.
President Derek Johnson, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And finally, people all over the world watched as the judge read the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. Here's a look at just some of the reactions from across our country.
What we just witnessed was the wheels of justice turning finally in the direction of minorities in this country. It was bittersweet, right? Because, you know, I'm saddened by the fact that my friend had to die for justice to be served and for a light to be shed on an issue that, quite frankly, has always been an issue. But it's sweet, man, because, you know, you see what makes America great. And what truly makes America great is fair and equitable treatment for everybody, regardless of race, creed, or color.
I think it'll make people more aware, especially police officers, more aware that there are people out there. We're watching you. We're videotaping things just because this has happened so many times. You can't even count how many times it's happened to black and brown people.
I don't think it's a period, but I think it's an opening for a different time. And I hope that this kind of behavior by officers, I'm hoping that the institutions will begin to change. It's not blue against whatever. It's let's just truth against, you know, injustice and truth against intolerance and racism, and sort of do that. And if you take that oath, then mean it. You know, take the oath and mean that.
I hope people don't think that this is the end, because there's so many of us that never got justice, still don't have justice.
And that does it for us here on The Breakdown. I'm Diane Macedo.
And I'm Terry Moran. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day.
With so much at stake, so much on the line.